Hello and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musitz.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing and cruising the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And every once in a while, when we come across an interesting person, we try to get them to be a guest on the show.
But what makes this podcast a little bit unusual is that only one of us sails.
And that would be me, Bela. I've been sailing for over 30 years, not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the East Coast of the United States.
And I, Mike, know very little about sailing. I'm probably best known for I'm the one that sinks unsinkable dinghies. So generally people keep me far away from their boats, but I'm curious. And how this works is I'll ask most of the questions and Bela will try to answer as best he can.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, before we dive into this week's episode where we have a guest, a repeat guest, I'd like to thank our listeners and I'd like to thank our supporters. We now have a Patreon page, so supporting the podcast is super easy. Just go to patreon.com/sailingtheeast. And our podcast is now also available on YouTube, as well as your favorite podcasting applications. So for those of you who are YouTube fans, just search for Sailing the East and you'll find it. And in our more recent episodes, you'll actually get to see Mike's and mine smiling faces on the episode. On the older ones, it's just audio on YouTube. So thanks again to all of our listeners and a special thanks for those of you who support the podcast.
Agreed, Bela. Thanks. And let's switch the focus to today's guest. And Bela, we're welcoming back a familiar face to our regular listeners. If my memory is correct, Mike was a guest back in episode 66, I think, and he was about to embark on a big adventure, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right. So back in episode 66, Mike was dreaming about and in the planning stages of taking a trip from Lake Champlain to the Bahamas. And Lake Champlain is on the border between upstate New York and Vermont. So it's a landlocked lake, and you have to take a canal to get down to the ocean. So in this episode, he starts his trip and by casting off the lines up in Burlington, Vermont, and he heads south via the Champlain Canal to the Hudson River. And this is a two-part interview or conversation Mike and I had. So in this episode, we sort of discuss some of the challenges of traveling from an inland lake to the Atlantic Ocean. For example, you have to take down the mast if you have a sailboat because there's a whole bunch of low bridges on these canals. And then you got to put it back up. And also he's got some great comments about transiting the busy harbor of New York City, which is quite a busy place. And then they also talk about his first overnight passage. So it was really a good conversation. And like I said, it was a bit long, so we broke it into two episodes. There's this one, and then part two will be coming out in a week or so.
Yeah, Bela, I'm glad you remembered. At the end of the podcast, the last one he did, you were going to say, "Oh, we'll check in with you, right, in a couple of months." And I'm glad you remembered to do that because this was fascinating to get an update on his story. So let's dive right in.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hi, Bela. How are you tonight?
I am wonderful. Hey, it doesn't look like you're on the boat.
No, we're not on the boat right now. So we are landlubbers, as you would call it in boat language.
Yeah, well, there's a time for that, I think.
Yeah, it actually worked out well. It's a nice break we have for a couple of weeks. So we have some family stuff that we needed to take care of, and we're actually in the process now of moving back down south to go to the boat.
Yeah. So for the benefit of our listeners, let's just do a little quick recap. You were on the podcast in episode 66, and we recorded that before you started your trip. And your trip being from Lake Champlain, which is a large lake that borders New York State and Vermont. And you came down the Champlain Canal to the Hudson River. and down the Hudson River, down along the East Coast. And you're planning to go to the Bahamas, if I remember correctly.
Correct. That is,
Yeah.
that has become our goal, as I
Yes.
call it.
Very
Because
good.
we're not there yet.
And this is your first big trip like this. So you've done a lot of
Yes.
sailing on Lake Champlain. And if I remember correctly, you have a Hunter 42 Dexalon?
44.
44 Dexalon. Thank
Correct.
you. And so you're this is your first sort of big trip on that boat.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is our first, and it is a big trip.
It's a huge trip. Are you kidding? It's
Yes.
yeah, both from all sorts of facets, right? Not just the distance, but all sorts of
Yes.
things. So, Mike, talk to us a little bit about sort of how you were feeling like when you cast off the dock lines and you were leaving your slip up in Lake Champlain and saying, "Okay, we're headed south."
Well, let me start with this first, which is there's been tremendous excitement and exhilaration that also goes along with what I'll call the trepidation and struggles of a trip like this. And there are some high highs and some low
Yeah.
lows, but it's
Yeah.
been an adventure, to say the least. And we love what we're doing right now, but it certainly is not what you call sitting on the back porch in retirement in a rocking chair. So it's been a lot of fun. And when we left, it turned out even leaving was challenging because we left the third week of September from Burlington, where we're in a marina. And the 3 days prior, we had hellacious winds up to 40, 50 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And it was constant. And because Burlington is not a protected marina, the boats were rocking and you're trying to get ready. And as a matter of fact, it was so bad the day before we were going to leave, boats were breaking loose
Oh my gosh.
in their slips where they were, lines got chafed and snapped, or they yanked the cleat
Yeah.
off the dock. It was
Yeah.
it was that windy.
Wow.
And we were just there waiting to leave at this point, and we were waiting for it to calm down. And then finally, we made a decision that it was going to be better the following day. And we got up and the winds had died a bit. And it wasn't bad in the marina, but it was still 15 knots.
Yeah.
And, we just said it was a north wind. We're going south. And if we don't go now, the weather for the next 3 or 4 days was not going to be great either. And we said, listen, once we get out and we're going south, we'll have the wind at our back. And we said, we're leaving. Fortunately, in our marina, there was a charter company, and they had 4 sailboats, big ones, that were all getting ready to leave to go down to the Caribbean where they charter for the winter.
Yes.
So fortunately, the guy in charge, the captain, who had 20 years experience, was extremely kind, helping us get ready, because at this point now the mast is down on the boat. You can't walk around the boat very well because things are all over the place. The shrouds are all over the place. You got straps, holding everything in place. And we literally had to do a 180 in 15 plus knot winds to get out of the marina. And he was very helpful in showing us how to make a quick turn off the dock.
Yeah.
And my wife was nervous, but we turned the boat around. And once we were headed south out of the marina, we were fine. But once we got out of the marina, we had to make a right turn into the wind. And as you probably know, and a lot of people think, well, you're on a lake. How bad can it be?
Right.
Well, my wife was too nervous to even video at that point to show people how bad it can be. But we had 5 to 6 foot waves on the bow coming at 3 different directions for the first hour.
Oh my gosh.
And the anxiousness is, okay, we can manage that. I've done that, but not with the mast laying down on the boat. And the person that, the marina that did this and took the mast down for us, he said, the one thing be careful of, don't get rocking too much in waves that the mast starts vibrating.
Bouncing. Yeah.
And so here I am in 15 minutes into our thing, and I'm worrying about losing my mast. Anyway, the first hour was tough. We turned south, and as soon as we turned south, we had it at our back, and away we went. And
Yeah.
within 2 hours, as we moved south on the lake, it calmed down.
Yeah.
And we were off. So 10 minutes into our trip, we were already being challenged.
Wow. And just so our listeners understand why you had to take the mast down is because you have to go through the Champlain Canal, and
Correct.
there's low bridges, which are not drawbridges. So
No,
I think the clearance is like 20 some feet, I think, if I remember
It's-
correctly.
it depends, but we were told by speaking with people that the lowest we were going to encounter was 17 and a half feet.
Yeah. So clearly you have to take a mast down.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah, there's no ifs, ands, or buts for a sailboat.
Yeah. 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 So just so people understand. So you leave Burlington, and if I remember correctly from sailing up on Lake Champlain, Burlington's about sort of the northern 2/3 of the lake. So you have a fair amount of distance to go on the lake, right? You probably have, but it
Correct.
starts getting narrow as you get further and further south.
Right. It was 2 days to the locks.
Yeah. To
Basically.
the first lock, which is at Whitehall.
Whitehall.
Yep.
What is the historical significance of Whitehall?
You tell me.
The birthplace of the U.S. Navy.
Yes, I remember seeing those signs there. There's a little placard, or not, not a small placard, but a pretty good size.
They put up a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most people, it was like Whitehall, it's landlocked, but
Yes.
it was on Lake Champlain.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Now that you mention that, I do remember seeing that. It's right next to the locks, I think, if I remember correctly.
correct. Yes.
Yeah.
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 They have signs going in and out of town when you drive there too about that.
Yeah. So how was your first sort of, okay, we're going through a lock experience?
Well, we spoke with people
Yeah.
that talked to us about it. And there was a couple that did a video of going through the locks, that they went from Lake Champlain and actually had a video showing exactly what they entailed going through. So I would say we were very well prepared and knew what to expect. And as a matter of fact, we were told and planned to go in on our port side, against the side of the lock. And it was also recommended that on top of the fenders, we had a 2x6 that was 12 or 14 feet long that you put outside the fenders so you don't scrape your fenders up.
Yeah. Because the walls are concrete, rough, coarse concrete.
Yes. And the good thing was, for 11 of the 12 locks, we were the only boat in the lock. So it also made it a lot more comfortable that you weren't surrounded by other boats pulling
Sure.
in. The guys in the locks were great. They're really nice guys. And, we pulled in, and I would say, you're anxious when you're going in the first lock because you're not really sure. By lock 3, we were bored and we had had enough of locks. They are not what you would call anything exciting. They're rather dull and dirty, is the way I'll put it, because the lines that you grab onto and use are full of whatever,
Yes.
the algae and everything else.
Sure.
And we were prepared because both my wife and I had big rubber gloves
Yeah.
that
Oh,
we
yeah.
were wearing so that your hands didn't get all scummy.
Yeah. And it's just the two of you at this point, correct?
Yes, it is only the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not at that
So-
point, the whole point.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And between the locks, you're basically in a canal. So you're motoring down this canal.
Correct. And at this point, we had very good weather. There's no wind, so there's no current, there's no
Sure.
tide, no nothing. And it's just a nice ride down the middle of a canal, and it was fun.
Yeah. And then you go through some more locks on your way down to the Hudson River, and you pop out into the Hudson River at Troy, New York, if I remember correctly.
Correct. And one of the nice things was that a couple of the towns along the locks have free walls to dock on. And as a matter of fact, in Whitehall, because we actually got there first and we went through the first lock, and they have a free wall, free power, free water. And naturally, I said, what a great marketing thing, because what did we do? We went into town and got something
Sure.
to eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there were several of those along the way, because at least for the sailboat, you can't go through the entire locks in one day. It's just too long of a day. And each lock can be up to a half an hour getting through a lock. Now, we were the only boat, so we moved quickly. So it took us 2 days. We took 2 days to get through the locks and out.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. And now you're in the Hudson River at Troy.
Yes.
And now you have a little bit of current, some tide, and some big ships to start worrying about.
I'll say yes and no, because we were so far up the Hudson. The good thing was there weren't any big ships that far up. And to be honest, the current wasn't that bad that it created any issues or anything. Our big thing was, now we've got to put the mast back up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Correct.
And there's a sort of a place where all the sailors go, if I remember
Yes.
correctly, right? There's
Yes,
the place to do that for the southbound folks and for the northbounders who need to take it down.
Correct. And there's 2 or 3 different marinas that do that. And I should have written that name down, because the guy that owns the marina, that's what we considered the best, they were the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. This guy that owned it, these people were so nice. Anything you needed, any help. And we pulled in there early. We actually weren't sure, they're packed. So when you're going to get your mast either put up or taken down, you better have a reservation. And especially at this place, because starting first thing in the morning, that's all these guys do. Bing, bing, bing. They put up the mast, get out of the way, and either move over there. But we got 2 more boats right behind you.
Right. Right.
So they have a process. And it's interesting because I made sure that I learned, I'm not a rigger. And, a rigger is a guy that knows everything about tensioning the mast, how it goes up, the whole bit. I took videos and pictures of everything when the mast came down, because I've only had it done once before then.
Right.
So it's a new experience. And when they put the mast back up, they don't do all the rigging and stuff. They get the crane, they put it up, they attach everything, and the thing is, get out of the way, because you need to know how to do that.
So you have to do all the tensioning and all that stuff.
Correct.
And running
Now,
all the lines, et cetera.
running all the lines back, and then reconnecting all the electrical.
Yeah.
Now, here's one of the things I put under my list of the best things that we had are the people you meet along the way. So the charter company I told you was in our marina, they're now coming down behind us. They left a day later because they were still getting ready. They pulled in to the same marina, and they now had 4 boats that had to be done, and they wanted them done that day because they have a schedule. So the guy that was in charge is a rigger. He came on our boat, was super nice, and he helped us.
Oh, wow.
Tension everything and had all the tools, the whole bit. And just the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet, and helped us through all of this. And so we basically got our mast done, and we left, and they were staying that night because they said they're going to work overnight to get the mast. So we're still ahead of them going down.
Yeah.
I guess the moral of this thing is that they left a day behind us. They had to be in the Caribbean. The punchline of this is we're still north of New York City and they're in the Caribbean already.
Wow.
It was kind of funny because when we went down the Hudson, the hurricane Ian was hitting.
Yes.
And it churned right off the Jersey coast.
That's right.
for
It just
several
sat
days.
there. Yeah, it just sat there. I was thinking of you
And
guys.
I can say we weren't going out there. Nobody was. But here came the caravan of the charter guys. And I said to him, we were communicating now online. I said, Mike, what are you going to do? He says, what do you mean? I said, where are you going to dock, or, we'll meet you. He says, oh, no, we're going. I said, you're going where? And he says, oh, no, we got a schedule. We're out of here.
Yeah.
And he later said to me, they were in 20-foot waves, 40-foot knot winds, and they broke the rigging on one of the boats, jury rigged it, and and 5 days later, I'm getting pictures from the Caribbean.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a professional operation.
And yeah, and that's not for me. I'm a
No.
strictly an amateur.
Well, and we're still in New York City.
Yeah. Yeah. So how was going down the Hudson? What were the sort of the highlights of that?
The Hudson it's a gorgeous trip. Now, we had good weather. We had wind at our back, and it was cool. The weather was already starting to get a little cool, but we had a great time going down the Hudson. We didn't have any issues. I'll say one of the things, it's sort of on my list of things to talk about, is getting to see things from a new perspective that you've seen a million times, but from a road.
Yes.
So one of the first things, we went by West Point, the military
Yes.
academy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
growing up and as an athlete, I had been there, competed there a lot, but on the land side. And we got to see it from the ocean side. And you come around this turn, and all of a sudden there's West Point. And all of a sudden, a small powerboat pulls right up to us and says, can you move over? Okay, we're going to move over. And we look, and they're the cadets swimming across the Hudson. And they've got 3 or 4 boats. And these guys are, I don't want to say learning how to swim, they're swimming. So when you talk about tides and currents and worrying
Right.
about the boat, here
Right.
come 50 or 60 cadets with buoys tied to them so you could see them swimming across the river. I mean, where are you going to see that from the road?
Right. Right.
So that was definitely an interesting sight that was unexpected. But it's just gorgeous coming down. Now, I worked for years in Manhattan, so I'm very familiar with the whole thing with the ferries, but my wife was not. And it was exciting for her to go past the Statue of Liberty and being able to see the Statue of Liberty. We went under the George Washington Bridge.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
And I'll say this, the George Washington Bridge was the first fixed bridge we were going under. It's 180 feet high, but it still looked like we were going to hit.
Yeah.
And anybody with a sailboat can relate that.
That's
it
right.
always looks like your mast is going to hit.
It really does. It's interesting what you said about the different perspectives of how you see something. So I can clearly remember, I as a kid, I'd been to New York City, and as a teenager, et cetera, by car or by bus, and I sort of had that perspective. And then when I got out of school and I started working, I used to travel a fair amount, and I would see, and I'd fly out of New York City, and I would see New York City from the air, which was a totally different perspective.
Right.
And then I clearly remember there was this period of time in the late 70s, I think, where if you landed at one of the New York City airports, either Newark, JFK, or LaGuardia, but your flight left from another one, they had a free helicopter shuttle that would take you from
Oh,
airport to airport.
yeah.
And I remember once I was leaving New York, and on purpose I flew from like Albany to LaGuardia, and I had my departure from Newark. I made it that way on purpose so I could take the helicopter.
Mm.
And then I saw New York City from 1,000 feet, fly, from a
Mm-hmm.
helicopter flying over, and which was like spectacular. And then a number of years ago, I finally got to see New York City from the water when I helped a friend of mine bring a boat up from Florida, and we came up through New York City into Long Island Sound, and that was yet another totally different view of the same piece of
Right.
land. It is remarkable how that changes.
Yeah. Now, the good part in all of this, going down the Hudson through Manhattan, as I said, I commuted for years into Manhattan and a lot on ferries. So I knew the lay of the land because we were docking in the marina in Jersey City.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew exactly where it was because that's where I used to take a ferry from. Now, the good thing was my wife was enthralled with seeing the city and everything from the Hudson. What she didn't see, which I didn't show her, was my chart plotter in front of me that showed 50 other boats with 20 ferries cutting in front of you in every direction so that the AIS system looked like a spider web
Yeah.
of lines of boats going everywhere.
And those
And
ferries go fast.
and they go, but I will say this and I have ridden them. They know what you are. It's a recreational boat. It's big, and they do give you.
Sure.
They don't force you to move. They go around you. They're in a hurry. They don't want to wait. They don't want to deal with incidents. So they're good. And so it didn't bother me because I had been on the ferries, but for a person that wasn't used to that, to look at their AIS to figure out, well, who's going to possibly, AIS shows you where collisions are. Well, when you see possible 8 collisions in front of you, it can be a little nerve wracking.
Right. Right.
And
Exactly.
it was also interesting too, because right there in Manhattan, a super yacht was parked right in the middle of the Hudson, anchored. And it was just kind of bizarre that through all of this, there's this 200-foot super yacht sitting there. But I guess I don't know, that's where they were. So that was great. The first, what I'll call anxiousness, was we had a reservation in this Jersey City marina.
Yeah.
And I knew where it was. I knew how to get in there. And then, as you know, you call into the marina, you let them know we're here. We now need directions as to where we're supposed to go. And my wife and I both got headsets to communicate with each other so we can hear what's going on. So even though I'm communicating, she's at the bow because she's getting the fenders and stuff ready. She can still hear what's going on with the marina. And the first thing she hears is, you need to turn left before the first super yacht. And when you turn, go around the next super yacht. And then you're going to bear right. Well, anyway, it was like getting directions in a development. Turn left here, turn right, then turn left. Well, when we get in there, okay, we're 45 feet, but we're not 145 feet.
Right.
And we're like looking at these things, having to navigate down one of these fingers or fairways, and there's multi-million boats on either side of you. And, and it's tight. And the last thing you want to do is bump into one of those. And that was a little nerve-wracking, that what I'll call first big docking with boats much bigger than you are, because this is one of the marinas they go to.
Yeah. And just be thankful the wind wasn't blowing really hard.
Oh, and it's a well-protected, the winds were blowing on the Hudson, but once we got into the channel where it was calm. And
that's good.
Yeah. So, and they were great too. They had guys all over directing us because it was hard to see in a normal marina, you can kind of see around the boats, but when the boats are 3 stories, 5 stories high, it's hard to see
Can't,
around.
right. You can't see. Right.
No,
Exactly.
but
Yeah. I have found marinas, and there's been a couple times this past summer where I was practicing doing things solo, and going into a new marina, and I would tell them, "Hey guys, I'm coming in solo, so can you just
yes,
have a couple of extra hands?" And they're more than help. I mean, they don't want you to hit anything,
no.
right? So if you let them know your situation, they're very, very helpful.
Now, I don't want to contradict what you're saying because we can get into a whole thing of marinas, which
Yes.
I've received in education, because we have called and said, we're unfamiliar. Can you have somebody help us? And they come back and say, no, we're too busy.
Yes. There's a wide range of service levels at
Exactly.
marinas.
And the first time we got that, my wife comes back to me and said, what did they say? Because
Yeah.
she's in the front of the boat having to do the lines. And it's like she had never heard that before. And I said, they said they're too busy. She goes,
Yeah.
but we're coming in. Aren't we paying for this? So
Yeah.
we've learned, and this is tongue in cheek. We've learned this: marinas lie. And when I say that, is you go on their websites and you see all the superlatives of what they offer and what they do and what they have. And then when you get there, the restaurant's closed. They can't help you dock. The bathrooms aren't working. And one thing I learned from you, the pump out isn't
Yes.
working either. So
Yeah.
we never let our boat get more than half full,
Right.
because as a matter of fact, 2 of the really nice, expensive marinas, their pump out's broken.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
If you have an opportunity to fuel, an opportunity to get water, and an opportunity to pump out, I always take advantage of it. I don't care if my fuel tank is 3/4 full, or my pump or my holding tank is only a quarter full. I'm going to pump it out because you never know.
you don't know. And I remember you saying that on one of your podcasts, where your marina, or where you were, that it was broken
Yeah.
and there was nowhere to go. You had to go wherever. And I always said to my wife, I learned that from Bela. If it's available, we're going to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad there's one thing there's one thing you picked up from all of my podcasts. That's
Well,
wonderful to
I
hear.
will say we picked up more than that, but that was certainly an
Yeah.
important one.
Yeah.
Is to always pump out and fill up when you have the chance.
Yeah.
So,
That's for sure. So, where to after Jersey City?
so we had to stay there for 3 or 4 days while it was churning out there, because in order to get to our next stop, which is down to the Delaware, uh, our boat in Jersey, the ICW, doesn't really exist. It's too
Right.
shallow.
Right.
You just can't take a large sailboat with we have a 5-foot draft. Well, you have a Hunter too.
Yep. I have the same
Um,
boat. Yeah.
So you have to sail out in the ocean. So we went from New York City to Atlantic Highlands, which is Sandy Hook.
Yep.
And so when the weather looked like it was improving, we moved there. I want to add this is, I think I mentioned one of the things that we've enjoyed and has been one of the highlights. We've met the best people along the way in other boats. And we met a Canadian couple when we were all the way up the Hudson at one of the marinas that was supposed to be the Ritz-Carlton of marinas, that we soon learned that they didn't have most of what they said they would.
Yeah.
And they were next to us in a slip, and they were coming from Canada and heading down. So we were there for 2 days because of the weather. We were holding up there a little bit. And we got to talking to them, very nice. and it just our cycles of where we were going matched, and they were very experienced sailors. They were retired as well, and they had a 45-foot boat, Beneteau, and so it was sort of like we were meeting them as we were hopping down, and then we ended up in the same marina in New York City. So in talking to them, I was picking his brain because they had done this before.
Sure.
So we ended up going to Sandy Hook with them and anchoring there. And he had actually, and I'm going to forget the guy's name, you might remember, there's a guy that does weather charting and plotting for people that you can hire him to do that.
Yep. There's a handful of people who do that. Yes.
And there's one guy that everybody knows. And again, I'm going to forget his name right now, but they had him do their weather thing because we were anxious. This was our first time out in the ocean.
Sure.
And it was going to be an overnight because we had talked to them about it. Do we go during the day, try to get to Atlantic City in daylight, or do we leave a little bit later, go overnight? That means we'll definitely get in during the day down to Cape May. And they were just a big help. And we buddy boated with them off the coast, which was very comforting to my wife because not only was it the first time in the ocean, it was overnight.
And you guys did this, just the two of you. This was your first ocean experience and first overnight experience.
Yes, on our own boat with us. I have been out in the ocean a bunch when I was younger, but not in my own boat and certainly not overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. So how'd that go?
It actually, what was really good was it was a full moon and it was crystal clear. So it actually made that anxiousness go down quite a bit because, you know, we could see everything around us and the seas were fairly comfortable.
Very nice.
They were rolling in 3 foot, but it wasn't anything and that would bother us. And we also ended up having a great wind in terms we were able to sail almost the entire way.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
So we had a beam reach and 10, 15 knots, and it was great. And we actually, in talking to the other couple, they convinced us that because we're going overnight and we're going to get in the morning down south, let's not go to Cape May, but shoot across the Delaware over to Lewes, Delaware, and anchor there, because then you go straight up the Delaware Bay, as opposed to in Cape May, you got to kind of do this gyration around the tip of New Jersey.
Right.
And they convinced us to do that. Now, here comes the other side. It was wonderful. We were moving so quick. We got to Cape May and it was still pitch black. So we didn't want to get in across the Delaware in pitch black because neither of us were familiar. So we kind of went at 2-3 knots and we were just slowly waiting for, and we were fine. It was great. We were having a great time. Sun comes up and we head across maybe a half an hour. It all went south and the winds came out of the Delaware like there was no tomorrow. And now we're in 5 and 6 foot waves on the bow, just beating us up.
Yeah.
So an hour and a half of just getting beat up after we had just sailed 22 hours.
Yes.
So it's one thing to deal with that the first thing of the day. It's another thing after 22 hours. And we'd been doing so well. So we had our first experience of no matter what you think you know or how well you prepare, be prepared for the unexpected.
Yeah.
And they were experienced and they said it was tough.
Yeah.
So we got into the bay, and once we got into the bay, then it was completely calm. But for an hour and a half, it was just the pounding on the front of the boat. So
yeah. I think the weather router person, possibly the one you were thinking of, is Chris Parker.
Yes, it is. Thank you. There you
Yeah.
go. Chris
A
Parker.
lot of sailors use him, and when I came down from Nova Scotia to Baltimore, that's who we used as a weather router as
Right.
well. Yeah, very, very, very professional operation, reasonable cost, and was very, very helpful.
So tongue in cheek, I had to ask them if we get a bit of a refund on that last part because it wasn't supposed to be like that.
Yeah.
So even the best, you have to be ready for that.
Well, sometimes there's these local phenomenons that are like on Narragansett Bay. You look at windy or any of those wind forecasting applications,
Mm-hmm.
they all miss this. But typically on Narragansett Bay, which where my boat is, if it's a sunny day, particularly if it's a sunny day, in the afternoon, there's almost always a pretty stiff south breeze from the south blowing at 20 knots.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at windy or any, predict wind, it doesn't show up. It just shows it's fine. So there are these local weather phenomena that lots of times those models don't capture very well.
Well, we had been warned about the Delaware and the entrance to the Delaware, but we had had such a great sail, and there was no indication that that was going to kick up. Now,
Yeah.
on the positive side, we anchored in the bay. The next day, we had perfect weather going up the Delaware. As a matter of fact, people even acknowledged other people in boats and stuff and said, "We've never seen the Delaware this calm."
Yeah.
So we actually were lucky that we were with the current and we had the wind at our backs, so that the question was, could you sail up Delaware Bay in one day? Well, we not only sailed all the way up to the top of Delaware Bay, we got through the C&D Canal
Wow.
the same day. And
Wow.
we were actually thinking with this other couple of anchoring at the top of the Delaware Bay because we felt that's where we could get to. And we ended up, as I said, going through the C&D Canal, and we actually anchored just at the beginning of the Chesapeake.
Yeah.
Through the canal.
One of the challenging things about the Delaware is there's not a lot of places to hide.
No.
Unlike the Chesapeake Bay, where every 2 miles there's a little place you can pull into, it seems like, and hide, from a storm or anything. But the Delaware Bay is like a bathtub. There's just like no place to really pull into. There's very few spots. So once you kind of commit to going, you pretty much have to go at least to the canal, and then you can always stop in, I think it's Chesapeake City.
Correct.
Is about basically the nicest and only significant place to stop on the canal.
Yeah, there's a place across from Chesapeake City.
Yes.
That has a dock and a restaurant. But yes, it's either all the way up the Delaware, or there are a couple of possible places, but they're not great places to anchor.
Right.
So that was our gift after being beat up the day before by the mouth of the Delaware.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. How did you guys do watches on your overnight sail? Was it 3? What was your sort of time schedule for watches?
Oh, it was very simple. Neither one of us slept.
Well, I can 100% understand that, being your first, overnight, and it's just, and plus it sounds like it was a beautiful sail. So you're enjoying it, the nervous energy is not exhausting you, or the tension is not exhausting you. So
No.
That's good.
The good thing, me personally, I'm not a big sleeper. I don't need a lot of sleep. So I wasn't concerned. I knew I could easily stay up all night. My wife stayed up due to anxiousness.
Yeah.
That she wasn't going to be able to sleep at all.
Yeah.
And we were only talking one night. So it was just basically turned it to be such a good sail. It was actually great being up because the moon was out. We had great seas. The wind was nice. And it was just the excitement of all that was going on around you with all the boats lit up. The the one thing that it was funny, we were talking about this today, was that my wife, the one anxious thing is that at night, though, you still have the tugboats,
Mm.
and instead of pushing a barge, they're pulling them at night for whatever reason. And the tugboats, to let you know they're pulling, they have this bank of lights on the front that is like 30 feet high,
Yes.
and it's like daylight, but it's on the front of the tugboat. In the meantime, there's 900 feet of darkness behind them, pulling these barges behind them. So on AIS, you see the tugboat, but not the barge. And fortunately, the moon was out, so you could sort of see the silhouette. But at times, it was a bit confusing, especially when we got near Atlantic City, because Atlantic City is like Vegas. It's all lit up. So you just have all these lights, and now you can't discern the boats. And so
Yeah.
we actually moved out further to get out of these lanes that these tugboats were in. Now they
Yeah.
could, because we didn't know this at the time, but a couple of boats called the tugs that were near them and said, would you turn on the barge lights? And then all of a sudden the barge lights would come on and you could see this
Oh.
massive thing behind it,
Yeah.
but then they turn them off again. So I don't know what the deal is with that, but that was the one thing that, sort of like this giant thing that you can't see, moving up and down. But if you have AIS, though, that is, I can't imagine, and we met many people that don't have it, and it's just like, how do you not have AIS on your boat? And I don't know if you want to explain what that is, but to me, it's mandatory.
Yeah. Yeah. I did it. There's an episode, I don't remember which number it is, all about AIS, and I installed an AIS unit on my boat and stuff. And I mean, you can get them for $500-600 now, or you can get them built into your VHF radio even for several $100s. And there's no way I would go out without it. It's just unbelievable. It's basically a way you can, if other boats that have AIS can transmit a signal, and they can also receive a signal from other boats that have AIS. And what the information you receive is that other boat's location, which then gets shown on your chart plotter, so you can tell where other boats are, assuming they have AIS.
Correct.
So
but
yeah,
the ones that
it works great.
Right. And the ones that do, you see the name of the boat.
That's right.
It shows you their direction, their speed, their location, and it has a line in front of their boat showing if it'll intersect with you. And if there is a chance, things start blinking just to alert you.
Yeah.
So, it makes life so much easier out there.
Yeah, it's a great invention. I mean, whoever invented it, I hope they're rich. They deserve to be rich. And all commercial vessels are supposed to have AIS. So, that part of it is really nice. And you're right. It makes it so much easier to call somebody.
Yes.
Because you know their name. You can hail them by name. And as opposed to, the boat that's 200 feet ahead of me heading south.
Exactly.
That's not very helpful.
No.
So
No,
that's
not at
great.
all.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. There's no way I would go out without AIS.
Mm-hmm.
Just not a chance. Yeah.
Wow, Bela, what an adventure. This was a great first half of the story, and I really enjoyed Mike's perspective, seeing this experience with fresh eyes. I loved his descriptions of both the high points and the low points of this first part of the trip. There really was a little bit of everything, wasn't there?
Yeah, there really was. And I got to tell you, as I was listening to Mike and having this conversation with him, I was a bit envious. It's one of those things. I've done this trip a couple of times, not from a lake, but basically going down the coast of New Jersey and up through the Delaware Bay and down through Chesapeake Bay. And I was a bit envious. It brought back memories of the great trips that I've had. And although I've never been to the Bahamas, that would be a great place to go as well. So maybe if I can talk you into taking a couple of weeks off, Mike, and taking everything that you've learned through this podcast and actually going sailing. That would be a trip we could do.
Love the idea. And you would trust me not to sink the boat? Okay, we'll talk about this, Bela. I like it. Well, what do you think? Time to wrap this up?
Yeah, there's not much more to add to the great conversation that Mike and I had. So let's wrap this one up.
Yeah, and stay tuned for part 2 next week. All right. So listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. And we hope you found our conversation both interesting and thought-provoking. And of course, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast. That's all one word at gmail.com.
Hey, and if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting app. And if you know of someone that would be a good guest on the show, let us know. We'd love to have them on as a guest. So I hope to see you out there, and make sure you listen to part 2 of this conversation with Mike Malekoff. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
Thanks, Bela, from over here in Münster, Germany. We'll see everybody next time.